Hi, we are Group 25, and we are studying the Giant Mudskipper Salosary. We want to examine how the foraging behavior of the Giant Mudskipper varies with the tide level in the mudflats in Sungai Buloh Wetland Reserve. So just a quick overview of the Giant Mudskipper. It is the largest species of mudskipper in Sungai Buloh Wetland Reserve and is typically 15 cm to 27 cm in length. It can easily be identified by the two distinct black stripes along the sides of its body. Our team went to the mudskipper port situated in the Sungai Buloh Wetland Reserve on 3 different occasions to conduct our observations. 3 4-hour sessions were conducted to study the foraging behaviors of mudskippers at very tight levels. The sampling method our team adopted was focal sampling, where each member focused on studying one single mudskipper every 4 hours. All the behaviors of a mudskipper and their corresponding time and length of occurrence were recorded in 5 minutes intervals with 2-minute breaks between each interval. This gives us different replicates of mudskipper behaviors across time. The benefit of using focus sampling is that we were able to obtain finely detailed behavior of each individual mudskipper. However, due to limited manpower and time constraint, only 5 mudskippers were observed at each time.
We acknowledge that as a student group, we face certain limitations in our studies. These include the following. Firstly, due to limited manpower, we could only observe 50 mudskippers. A larger sample size would have been more ideal. Secondly, we found that it was more difficult to observe mudskippers during high tide. This is because they tend to go into their barrels, which were under murky waters. Thirdly, due to the opening hours of the nature reserve, we could only observe the mudskippers in the day, including morning and afternoon. Lastly, we also acknowledge that there are other confounding variables that might affect the study as well, such as the weather, whether it was rainy or sunny, for example. However, despite these limitations, we still believe that our results are valid. This is because our results are largely in sync and supported by evidence from other research studies that we have cited at the end of our presentation.
Based on our observations of 15 mudskippers over a accumulated time span of 12 hours each, we have observed a variety of behaviors that can be categorized into 5 main categories, namely foraging, terrestrial, locomotion, resting, and others. Focusing on foraging behavior only, it consists of several phases, the first being searching for food, where the mudskipper moves around without an obvious destination. After the mudskipper has found a potential prey, it then begins to stalk the prey, where it observes and aims at the prey with minimal movement. After a period of time, the mudskipper pounces on its prey at a great speed by flexing its tail and propelling itself forward. The mudskipper then attempts to capture the prey with its mouth, which may or may not be successful. If successful, the mudskipper may exhibit the behavior of moving to safer places, such as a nearby puddle, where it can handle its prey safely. Finally, the mudskipper eats its prey. Thus, the behaviors categorized under foraging are searching, stalking, pouncing, capturing, eating, and moving to safety. Collating our results, we found that during low tide, the mudskippers spent approximately 17% foraging, 10% on terrestrial activities, 51% resting, 15% traveling, and 7% on other activities. At high tide, the mudskippers spent 63.2% resting, 29.4% traveling, and 7.4% on other activities.
According to our results, we noticed that there was a significant increase in overall foraging activity during low tide as opposed to high tide. Based on our research, there are a few reasons for this: predators, availability of food, and energy expenditure. Firstly, during high tide, many mudskipper species, including the giant mudskipper, take cover in their submerged burrows to avoid being attacked by marine predators. Typically, organisms reduce time spent foraging or out of foraging habitats when predation risk increases. Since there is a lower risk of being predated upon by marine animals during low tide, mudskippers exhibit more frequent foraging behavior, which is consistent with our results. Secondly, there is a decrease in the availability of food sources at high tide, as crab burrows are filled with water and worms are harder to prey underwater. In contrast, prey is more abundant at low tide, and mudskippers can maneuver easily on mudflats. This results in higher frequency of foraging behavior during low tide. Thirdly, according to the optimal foraging theory, predators tend to minimize foraging costs to maximize profit. During high tide, travelling and hunting against the tide incurs a higher level of energy expenditure as compared to low tide. Therefore, mudskippers tend to conserve this extra energy by foraging during low tide.
On an extra note, during the low tides, we also observed that the frequency of foraging activity varied with different sizes of mudskippers. The larger mudskippers were foraging more passively, waiting for prey to come to them, whereas the smaller mudskippers were foraging more actively, moving around looking for prey. As you can see from the video, the larger mudskippers we observed here is waiting passively for prey and only moves when the worm crawls near it in order to catch it. In contrast, the smaller mudskippers are seen actively searching for their prey. This appears to be due largely to different energy requirements. The smaller, less mature mudskippers have a higher metabolism than the larger ones and so require a higher level of energy intake due to growth. Therefore, active foraging allows them to encounter more prey. Also, due to their smaller size, they require less energy to move around as compared to their larger counterparts, so they are able to afford to move around more. We also hypothesized that the terrestrial instincts played a key role in foraging of the larger mudskippers. The more mature, larger mudskippers who had young tended to do passive foraging near their burrows, whereas the other mudskippers who might not have young did active foraging far away from their burrows. In conclusion, the results of our observations showed that the foraging frequency of mudskippers were much higher during low tide as compared to higher tide due to a variety of reasons. These include predatory risks, availability of food, as well as differences in energy requirements for foraging. Additionally, we found that foraging behavior of mudskippers also varies with other factors such as the size and maturity of mudskippers. Larger and older mudskippers were more passive foragers due to their lower metabolism and reproductive responsibilities. And in comparison, smaller and younger mudskippers were more active foragers. Therefore, our conclusion is that mudskippers generally utilize the foraging strategy of minimizing costs of foraging in order to maximize their profits and gains. With that, we end our presentation. Thank you.